Thank you, and thank you for the warm welcome. I'm a researcher in Copenhagen. I am working with how we can use artificial intelligence to improve recognition of cardiac arrest. This is my credentials, and I'll rush on because I'm a researcher. I have far too many slides for my time. A bit about Copenhagen and Denmark. Denmark, small country, size of Hamburg. We are 5.8 million inhabitants. We have 5 healthcare regions, and all healthcare are free for the citizens and financed through taxes. The EMS systems, the RETTUNGSDIENST, are integrated part of our hospital service and are led through the same trusts. Copenhagen is over here. We are far the largest region in Denmark, and we have 1.8 million inhabitants, one trust running all 6 university hospitals and the emergency medical service. We have 40,000 healthcare employees. We work with the 29 municipalities and 4 police regions in the capital regions. We have 7 fire rescue services and 1 private ambulance provider, which we will subcontract with. We have the same problems you have. We have a growing population. We have more elderly citizens. We have more patients with comorbidities. And not the least, we have higher expectations for how available are we. And at the same time, a demand for more patient empowerment. You don't need a physician to treat you. You have Googled it all yourself. We have, fortunately, more diagnostic tools available, and we have a lot of challenges, but also a lot of good opportunities to treat them. But first, I will talk a bit about the change we have been through the last few years. And this is very typical. Everybody wants something to change because it is not good enough. But when we say, who wants to change? Everybody looks down. And that was pretty much what we met when we started looking at our service in 2008. Before 2008, we had emergency care free of charge. When you call 112, it was either the police or the fire brigade who picked up the phone. They triaged you and perhaps dispatched an ambulance. We had several different ambulance providers, and we had 2 different dispatch centers scattered around the region. There were different procedures and different medical supervision and very different treatment depending on how lucky you were, calling either this center or completely separate. The out-of-hours service was a private entity that was more or less the private GPs having out-of-hours service if you need some help from, what is it called in Germany, 11.6, 11.7? Yeah. And the emergency departments were standalone. You could just walk in, and you would walk in and wait for hours before being treated. We had 3 different hospital trusts and 12 independent hospitals. What happened after 2008? We had 1 hospital trust. We closed a few hospitals, and we had 6 university hospitals in 9 locations, and not least, that's me, 1 EMS. We had all emergency calls directed straight to us. No different providers, just 1 place to call, and all people who answered the phone were medical dispatchers, which means they were either nurses or paramedics. And there was always a physician on site controlling this system. We also had all ambulance service referring straightly to us. We had the same standard operating procedures, and we had the same medical supervision. And now we also had the out-of-hours service as a part of the EMS, which means if you call 11 you would talk to us. And not least, we had to refer you to the emergency department, which means we could say, don't go to this hospital because there's a queue, go to this hospital, and don't go now, wait 30 minutes because then we have booked your slot. And that is, the great thing is, before we had this system, there was 3 to 4 hour waiting at the emergency department. Last year we had 9 minutes average waiting time. Unchanged is still free. The main task for us is we handle all calls and dispatch ambulance. We have the medical helpline 1813, which is where you call with any worries, which are not very urgent and an emergency call. And we are the dispatch center for all pre-hospital resources. And that's approximately 130,000 calls from 112. We have 1 million calls for 1813. We dispatch 300,000 ambulances each year, and we also dispatch the sitting patient transports for the hospital, which is about 500,000 transports. We operate 51 ambulances. 27 of them are 24/7. No, yes, 24/7, all night, all day. We have 9 ambulances which are put in when we are most busy, and then we have 15 part-time ambulances which are either day or night shifts. We have 6 mobile critical care units, which is basically a physician in a car, and we have 25 non-emergency transport vehicles, which are an ambulance for patient transport to the hospital. They can, in a peak situation, be converted into a proper ambulance. We also have the helicopters, which is the emergency medical service. We do not use it much in Copenhagen. We have very few remote areas, but we have a few islands which are very happy about the helicopter. Our special resources. This black ambulance is our psychiatric service, which we dispatch for people in psychiatric emergency. We have the social lines, which is a social unit. And not least, our baby lines, which is for the premature born babies. So they can be transferred to high competence facilities. And not the least, not least, Major Incident Command Center. It happens a few times. We have not been cursed by many terrorist incidents yet, probably to come. But the Major Incident Command Center is always operational. We have the medical responsibility in case of a major incident and will coordinate between hospitals. This is the only entrance to the care centers in case of emergencies. And we will also warn hospitals, and it's the point of contact for all other authorities in case of a major incident. And for the CNN, we also have a few journalists employed. But this is where I spend every day, in the dispatch center in Copenhagen, working with my cardiac arrest machine. And it is always staffed by paramedics and nurses, and this is one of our physicians, which are always present at the center. When we receive a call, we will triage it to the appropriate response. We will book you in either at a A&E or pick you up in an ambulance and bring you there. Every day, we send out text messages to our customers asking, were you happy with what you met? And fortunately, 90% think we provide a good service. So this is a data summary, not very interesting, and I will rush on because I'm under pressure. What we saw, speaking of change, is we had a lot of different parts. They were just separated. And what we used to think is we brought them together to have a very beautiful service. And now I will move on to cardiac arrest, because cardiac arrest is universally a key performance indicator for how well an EMS service works. This is why cardiac arrest is important. From the moment someone collapses with a cardiac arrest, the chances of successful survival decreases approximately 10% per minute if you do nothing. If you do some kind of CPR, people will survive. And if you have high quality CPR, more people will survive. But the problem is, you have to do something at this point, or when the ambulance arrives here, most of them are dead. This is also what we call the chain of survival. We need to recognize there's a cardiac arrest. We need to start early CPR. We need to start defibrillating, and then you are at the hospital down here. But the reason this one is large is this one is the most important thing in the chain of survival. Recognize the cardiac arrest. And who is it that is recognizing the cardiac arrest in Copenhagen? Well, whoever calls us has recognized it in 20% of the incidences. The rest think they found the husband lying. He's probably just passed out. Perhaps he hit his head or something. While the medically trained dispatcher talks to the bystander, we will recognize another 50 to 60% of the cardiac arrest. The problem is we're still missing 20 to 25% of the cardiac arrest, which means we arrive to a dead person. So what can we do about this? It's just a little bragging sheet. We have 5,400 cardiac arrests per year in Denmark. We recognize 77.5% of the cardiac arrest in average. At least we think that, because 77.5%, the bystander has started some kind of resuscitation. We have 26% who are some kind of alive at hospital arrival, and after 30 days, 15.7% of our cardiac arrest patients are alive. And if you look only at the Unter benchmark, which is you have a shockable rhythm and you've witnessed the cardiac arrest, it's 46% who are alive after 30 days. Yes. And this is what it looks like. What happens if when you start change, we started change on how to resuscitate in public places back in 2000, and now we have moved. And this shows change actually do work, and it does help to educate the public. And if we look at this one, it's even better. This is where we compare ourselves internationally, and this is Denmark. And incidentally, this is when I started my PhD. But luckily, we have just surpassed Seattle and are now the best in the world, coming from a rather low point. And all this is slowly working mostly with the public, but also around here, starting having medically trained dispatch. And that's climbing. But still, and now we come to the AI. Sorry it took so long. Can we do better? Because we still have the 25%, which we do not recognize on the phone. And we also want these people to have some kind of chance to survive. But what is artificial intelligence? We all know from our phones and other stuff, you can make a computer recognize a thing. We can say to a computer, these are pictures of a dog, and these are pictures of cake. Try to learn what is going on. And Sometimes it will be difficult. These are pictures of dogs, apart from the 2 cakes. And sometimes it is really, 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 really difficult because some of these might be dogs, even though I'm not entirely sure. But what we do is we take a picture, feed it to a computer, we tell it what is it, computer trains, find out, it inputs to a data training set and goes around in circles and circles and circles, learning what does a dog look like, what does a cake look like, and at a certain point it has found out how do I identify dogs and cakes. And basically we have done the same with cardiac arrest calls. We have taken all our calls to the EMS service. We have labeled the calls. Was this call about a cardiac arrest or was it about something entirely different? Yeah, that is. And we have trained our computer, but also important to remember, we can only be as good as the data we put in, but we try to train. And the problem we are addressing is we cannot understand what people are telling us because they are in distress. They have put the phone on the floor, they're shouting, running around in circles. And if we do not understand what people are saying, we cannot say it's a cardiac arrest, we cannot start CPR, and we cannot start asking people try and find an AED. So we put all the talk into our machine, and we have developed a small computer standing on the table, alerting the dispatcher, when have you found a dog, and when have you found a cake or a cardiac arrest? We were so fortunate that we could publish our results, and what we found was we fed the machine with 108,000 calls. Just about 1,000, less than 1%, were cardiac arrest calls, and a machine could successfully recognize 84% of these calls being cardiac arrest. And when we looked at our data, historically, the dispatchers had recognized 72.4%. Which means if we had had this system in 2014, when this data came from, 107 persons could have had a chance of a successful resuscitation. We know our response time in Copenhagen is about 7 minutes, so these people are most likely not very much alive. What we also found was, in average, when a dispatcher recognizes the cardiac arrest, they take 79 seconds. When we have the machine analyzing the same calls, it's about 48 seconds, which means you also gain some time. Maybe 30 seconds isn't a lot, but it's better than nothing. And when we look at the American Heart Association, they say a good emergency medical service will recognize a cardiac arrest in 120 seconds. A top-notch emergency medical service will recognize a cardiac arrest in 60 seconds. Then we say, this may just move us from being good to being top-notch. But as with every kind of new stuff we bring in, we have some problems. We had the calls, we had the cardiac arrest. We knew from listening, when I say we, I had listened to all the calls, that there was 1,300 calls where the dispatchers had thought this is a cardiac arrest, and when the ambulance arrived, there was no cardiac arrest. There was either a drunk man who was passed out, there was an epileptic person in spasms, or something else. But the computer did worse. 2,900 times it said this might be a cardiac arrest. So we could say we have 1,600 extra alerts. And if we had had the system, if we had had the dispatchers saying an alarm, what would the consequence have been? First of all, the dispatcher would have said, you need to start CPR. if you start CPR on a living person, most likely he will say, ow, don't do that. And that might not really be a problem. Research on this says there are no significant problems in starting CPR for a short time. If you go on for 6 minutes on a living person, then you have a problem. But if you just start it and then stop, there are several studies showing it's insignificant. Then you can say, but if we had dispatched 1,600 ambulances extra, would we have flattened our ambulances? Could they at all respond to the real cases? But when we looked at these calls, we found all these incidents had historically been very urgent. And that's probably because if a person looks dead, sounds dead, but are not dead, there's probably something else very wrong, and you need an ambulance. So what we think when we're looking at this study is there were some consequences, not big, and we couldn't really see the problem. So we said, bring it on. Let's try to see, does this work in a clinical practice? And this is where research gets boring because it takes time. We started a randomized trial. We started it 1.5 years ago almost, and we have just ended it here a few weeks ago, where we say every second time the machine suspects a cardiac arrest, it will pop up an alert for the dispatcher. And when we start cracking the numbers, we can see, did this really make a change? Are machines better than dispatchers? And what will happen? What happens in our randomized trial is someone finds a cartoon lying on the floor, calls 112. We have our artificial intelligence analyzing the call as it is going on. If it's a cardiac arrest suspicion, our lamp will signal to the dispatcher, suspect a cardiac arrest. And if the dispatcher asks again the bystander and are confirmed this could very well be a cardiac arrest, then we can say, please start resuscitation. And this is going on now, today, and this is our very fancy computer. And you may ask, why does this look like an IKEA lamp? That is because first iteration of this was a black box. Nobody liked black boxes. So we built a lamp. It's a bit of cozy thing. It's a nice light in the evening. And suddenly dispatchers liked it. But whenever this one, which is really a very powerful computer, standing here analyzing everything that goes into the phone, when it suspects a cardiac arrest, it will pop up a small alert in this corner of his screen saying, do suspect a cardiac arrest. And he will be taken aback and say, it could be, unless he already had recognized it. And he will ask again, is the patient breathing? Is the patient conscious? Because these are the two most important questions. But sometimes when you ask, is the patient breathing? The caller says, well, sort of. Is it moving? Sort of. And you, yeah, well, okay. But the breathing could be agonal breathing, which you might be familiar with. It's and you do that when you're dead. But what we can say now is in this system we have built, and this is quite a recent, real story. There was a 40-year-old man at work, feeling dizzy, feeling chest pain, and suddenly he collapses, becoming unconscious. There's a colleague calling 112. In Denmark, we have an app for it, so when you use the app, the address is transferred to us, and we immediately know where do you call from. This colleague calls us, we have the address, and from the moment we pick up the phone, we say, now starts the clock. And it's a race against the clock because we saw every minute passes by, this 40-year-old man has 10% less chance of seeing his family again. We will always answer our calls within 5 seconds. Always. Anytime. It will not happen we do not do that. And when the call is answered, our little computer is analyzing the call simultaneously, helping our dispatchers. Is this a cardiac arrest? In this case, he recognized the cardiac arrest quite fast, and at the same time, he will always have a map of every available AED in Denmark, publicly available AED. We have 20,000 AEDs available all over Denmark. This is Copenhagen, and he can zoom in and see at this location, is there any AEDs available? Could the bystander go fetch an AED? But even better, he can also dispatch citizen first responders. We have in the capital region more than 20,000 first responders who has downloaded this kind of app, and when we suspect a cardiac arrest, we hit the button, say, go to the cardiac arrest, and the nearby 20 bystanders get an alert, and if they accept the mission, he will get a map and start running. They will go either straight to an AED, or they will go straight to the patient. We have, when we dispatch 20 responders, 2 of them will go straight to the patient, and 4 of them will go straight to the patient, and 16 will go get an AED. At the same time, in our very integrated system, all the information at the dispatch centers are forwarded to the ambulance. In this tablet, which is the medical record. In this medical record, we can look into what has happened to this patient previously in the hospital, what kind of prescription is he on, and all the information the ambulances are collecting at the scene, the ECG, all the vital parameters are being sent to the hospital, which are supposed to treat the patient. So when our 40-year-old man arrived at the cath lab, they had, before he arrived, analyzed the ECG and knew exactly who was coming, what kind of patient were he. And luckily, this guy survived. He was one in a few. But what we have seen, and the change we've been through, is it takes a system to save a life. We cannot just say it takes an ambulance. It does not just take an emergency center or some bystanders or a hospital. We all need to work together for this. So it's both the bystanders, the call center, the ambulance, and the hospital. And this is why we have also been reaching out to partners all over Europe, saying we need to work on this artificial intelligence thing. We need to look into further diagnosis as what is a stroke. We know strokes are problematic. We know general risk assessment, because a lot of the patients we get called about, we do not evaluate them properly. We do not always know what was wrong with this patient. We could need some help, and perhaps the artificial intelligence can help us in this. We've put together a consortium from Germany. It's the Berlin Feuerwehr with Stefan Polacek, who you probably know. And we would love to see more EMSs joining if they feel they have any data and conversations to put in. Could we work together on this? And of course, I hope to see you all in Scotland. But another reason, plenty of time. Another reason why these tools are important is we have heard about Generation Alpha today. We've heard about they need some diagnostic tools. The mechanic analyzing the Volkswagen just put a plug in, and perhaps this new generation will not be as apt as we are. What we see is Generation Alpha from the neuroscientific research. They are not able to focus. They are, I'm sorry to say, less intelligent than we are, and it all points down to smartphones. They use them too much. They cannot understand a simple command, and they cannot remember a guideline. So perhaps we really need to help them develop some tools while we have the time before we die, and go on. Yes, and I think that was about it. If there's someone who wants more information, these slides will be available afterwards. We have a white paper on how we do EMS in Denmark. We have a small video, which are very cozy. And here's a few references. Thank you.